Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Just thought I'd pop on initially to let you know that within this podcast you are not able to see the images and the graphics that we're referencing, which was my mistake. When I was doing it on Streamlabs you could see them, but that wasn't the screen that was being recorded. Difficult to explain, but anyway, I messed up basically. So you'll be able to just see me and Ben the whole time and not what we're referencing. But what I'll do is I'll upload those images to Twitter and also put them in a link to them in the description. And what I'll do is just show you them now actually. So if you want to, you can just open this up in a new tab, have it open twice, and just quickly pause the video and just see the graphics we're discussing if you want to see them. So I'll quickly show you those now. Here you go. Initially we just discussed a fixtures ticker, so you can pause this anytime. It's fixtures ticker but with midweek fixtures, and then there's a table for defenders, midfielders and attackers. As I said, this will be on Twitter as well, but I thought I'd put it here so you can see it really easily if you need to go back and just reference it or open it in a new tab. Great, nice one. Also, like overall, the quality might not be as good as well. I'm at my parents' house, not my own house, and the Wi-Fi is not quite as good. So yeah, sorry, bit of a mistake. Yeah, we had the chaotic ending to the last pod due to losing connection. So just another one to add to the list, but not a big deal. We just do this for fun. We don't make any money out of it. We just record a podcast for fun. So these things happen, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Anyway, start podcast. Hello everyone, welcome back to Inspector Goals, the podcast where we try to improve our FPL play through a more analytical approach. I'm joined this week by Ben Krellin. How are you doing, Ben?
I'm doing okay, thanks. Off the back of a bad game week, and I think I've just got a simple decision to make this week with my transfer. But how are you doing, Sam?
I'm doing okay. That was a big sigh before you said I'm doing okay, which probably is telling of the kind of game week you've had. Yeah. I was probably one of the few people who had a good game week. I got 41 somehow, which is basically because I still own Fernandez. But it is one of those game weeks, although it was overall awful, and it's very easy for me to say as someone who's actually done quite well this game week. Although it was overall awful, if you did badly, thankfully there wasn't too much ground lost on people. The players you didn't own, very few of them scored highly as well, which I guess is a bonus. I looked at your team, Ben. You got 20. But even that, your only player who returned is Mbeumo. But even a score of 20, you probably only lost 10 points on the field, something like that. So I guess you can look at it positively in that sense, in that whoever did poorly, it could have been punished far more if those other players did return. Just a bit of a freak game week, I guess.
Yeah, it feels like a really bad game week, but the amount you're going backwards is way less than the amount you go forwards on a really good game week. I've only just dropped back. I've just undone the green arrow that I got in game week 10, basically, and gone back to around 600k. But this is the worst I've ever been doing at this point during the season. But it is a bigger field, and I'm a bit worried about getting into the top 10k by the end of the season, just because of the lack of blanks and double game weeks later. But I just got to not panic. Sometimes I have negative thoughts after a bad game week about my season overall, but I just got to keep my head down and make simple, good decisions, and there'll be better game weeks to come, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, also, even though overall it's lower than you've ever been, your rank is it about 500k or something like that? Actually, if you compare that
590.
That actually, if you compare that to the average of a lot of people who are engaged on Twitter, or even amongst analytics players, for example, it's probably about average, to be honest. So relative to the field.
Just looking. The league that I'm in with you guys, I'm way behind you and Luke and Seb. You're all flying ahead.
Yeah, we've the three of it. Well, even I include you in it. I genuinely think about 500k at this stage for this season specifically is actually fine. Yeah, I think your rank is absolutely fine, and me, Luke, and Ben are all around the top 100k somewhere. I think Luke's 43k or something. He's had an amazing start, but as you said, it will be because of the less doubles. It does mean there's less opportunity to catch more casual managers, so to speak, towards the end. But still, the fact that in general more engaged managers are doing poorly is also a positive as well, because you've got less of them to catch in terms of your rank as well. And I guess general thoughts on Game Week 11 are that when I was thinking about it, is, apart from the obvious of it was an absolute disaster, is it's been quite an interesting week in terms of what's happened since or during it, just with Saka potentially being injured and Nketiah potentially being injured, Cash having a knock but now probably being okay, but some people thinking, oh, maybe we should be selling him now anyway. Stupinan suddenly out of nowhere is back. Eze played 30 minutes for the first time in ages, and now Maddison injured. So actually quite a lot has happened during the game week or since, which makes it more interesting.
And
I guess.
the Spurs, the biggest shift in the Premier League is the Spurs centre backs both being out, and plus Maddison, but and Doggy being banned. Spurs maybe were an average defence, a bit below average defence even with them, and now they'll be quite an easy defence to play against. And I have a decision on whether to play Pedro Porro this week or Tsimikas. And I see that Tsimikas is starting for Liverpool. People can interpret that however they want, but ideally he'd play 60, 70 minutes, then get taken off. And
yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, that's one of the wildest games of football I've ever watched. I made a list of everything that happened in the first half, and it was it's about 15 items long. Just the amount of VAR checks, potential red cards, actual red cards, potential penalties, actual goals, disallowed goals. It was just absolutely mad. I really enjoyed just watching it as a football match, to be honest. And and you're right in terms of so often when one player, well, I guess a similar thing's happening with Newcastle, right? So they're quite an interesting teams to compare, because I heard a lot of people say that Newcastle defend so much from midfield and from the front that actually just losing Botman when it was just him, long term, maybe isn't a huge deal. Now it's Burn as well, whereas it's a huge deal for Spurs, losing 3 of your 4 main centre backs. There's just no escaping the fact that makes them a significantly worse defence. Do you think it is similar with Newcastle, or with it just being 2 of them? Do you think it's not as to the same extent?
I think it's worse for Tottenham, because I think they played with a really high line against Chelsea, but I think they play with quite a high line most of the time anyway, and they get away with that because of Van der Ven being the fastest centre back in the league, and he can cover back and clean up. And without him, it falls apart. And then Romero is a great centre back as well. And just think they'll really suffer now without those 2 players. And Newcastle are more of a unit. Lascelles has done quite well filling in. I've still got Share, and we lose Burns' height, which is a worry. But we did sign two fullbacks in the summer, and people questioned why we'd spent the money on them. But Livramento has been pretty good, especially defensively, since he's come in, and I'd be confident that he'd do well. He's just not as good in the air as Burn.
And do you think is it Lewis Hall? Is that the right name?
Yeah.
Is it? Do you think he will play Premier League minutes?
Yeah, I think Livramento will probably play more and get more starts, but Lewis Hall should get the odd start as well, because he's naturally left-footed, and it allows Trippier to play on the right and make the overlapping runs and get the crosses in. You can't really do the overlapping runs and put crosses in on your left foot if you're right-footed as well. So yeah, there'll be some games when Hall starts, I think. So I'm not sure about Livramento, but Newcastle's fixtures are kind of poor at the minute, a bit average, aren't they? They've got this great fixture this weekend, but then I don't know, it's hard to say. Chelsea at home, Man United at home, but you could assess what happens in those games, and then there's some great fixtures coming up. A little run in 17 to 19, when hopefully you'll have an idea of who's the more nailed, and you could transfer in Livramento then if he seems nailed.
The thing that's tricky there, though, I've just got up the graphic of the of the fixtures, including the midweek games, and it's just so unpredictable, isn't it? Because either side of Chelsea, Man United, they've got PSG. But then not only that, but after Man United, the Everton games are then midweek. So in general, lineups are going to be more difficult to call now, aren't they? But that PSG game is now absolutely massive. It was already big. It's a Champions League game, but they just have to win that to have any chance of going through, or even getting to even finishing third is a big deal, isn't it? To get in the Europa League. So yeah, undoubtedly we will see some rotation of Chelsea and United players there, but I guess no one's really considering transferring in a Newcastle player now, are they? It's more just whether any of them are transfers out.
Short term, the short term people might be thinking of jumping on Gordon this week because he's playing up front against Bournemouth, but I'm not thinking about that. Like, yeah, just wait and see what happens.
Yes.
But yeah, there's Newcastle are playing every midweek and don't really get a week off until January, so there'll be rotation definitely. I don't think Livramento or Hall could start every game.
No, absolutely. And I guess as soon as we got this fixture ticket here, when I looked at this, kind of the two things that stood out to me in terms of Premier League fixtures were Villa and Spurs, just because they're teams where a lot of people own assets from those teams, but we see like a bit of a swing with Villa playing Man City and Arsenal in game week 15 and 16, and then Spurs from game week 14 their fixtures get worse. They play City, then West Ham, then Newcastle. Who do you have from those teams at the moment, and do you see yourself selling any of them?
I have Watkins, Cash, Son, and Pedro Porro. I think I'm keeping Son and Watkins until game week 18. It looks like I'll be doing that. Just have good fixtures then, assuming I'm not free hitting. And I guess I'll sell one of the defenders, either Cash or Porro, fairly soon. Like, we might talk about it later, but whether you can hold these like mid-priced defenders through their tough fixtures kind of depends on the strength of the rest of your defenders, and whether you can get good starting 11s out if you're going to bench, say, Porro when playing Man City away, or if you bench Cash in game week 13 and 15, or do you need to sell them in order to have a decent 11 each week?
Yeah, definitely. And I think even in game week, you mentioned 13 against Spurs, but 15 and 16, like, I'm getting Cash on my bench in 13, as well as 15 and 16. So that does make me wonder, like, if I'm going to sell a defender, maybe I'll just sell him now. But one of the key things is worries about rotation of other defenders, like I'm potentially bringing in Gabriel, plus I also already own Tsimikas, and there's some uncertainty there about rotation potentially for either of those two. So I'm just not sure if now's the time I want to bring in a player, take out a player who plays minutes basically so I'm not I'm not reliant on Kabore essentially. So I think, like, in general, like, now this is when we usually think of it around Christmas time, don't we? But I think even now is when rotation becomes way more likely, and will only increase up until the new year. And with if from my opinion, because I know I'm definitely not free hitting in 18, that really puts me off. Puts me off selling Cash, and makes it just obvious that I keep Watkins this whole time. Although that would probably be the case anyway, because they play Sheffield United that week, and I know that's a week where I'll need to just prioritise my transfers elsewhere, and I'll be thankful of having players who play Sheffield United that week as well. I don't know, but it's definitely an interesting one. And the other team that stood out to me were Brighton, for similar reason of what we've just discussed around Newcastle with regards to potential rotation there with the midweek games as well. We've had an interesting quote about Estupiñán as well, who's potentially back soon. Did you want to read that quote, Ben? Did you write it down?
Yeah, I've got it here in one other tab. It said he will be on the bench. This is for tonight's match, which I think he is. They've just kicked off, haven't they? And De Zerbi then said, maybe he can play a part tonight, but I won't take a risk with him as we need him for an important game on Sunday, and we don't have many solutions in that position. And then looking at Estupiñán's minutes before the injury, he played 90 minutes in every game from game week 1. Up to the EFL Cup third round. He even played 90 minutes in that game. He was no games on the bench, just 90 minutes. How many games in a row? Like 10 games in a row, 9 games in a row, and then he got the injury against Aston Villa. So he looks more nailed on this year. Like, if he can get back from his injury okay and not be at risk of like re-injuring himself, you'd think he'd be playing 90 minutes. He'd be pretty nailed on, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's more just how tentative they are with regards to how gradually they bring him back. But the key thing is that he's not been out for a really, really long period of time, months. He's been out for weeks or maybe about a month, something like that. So in terms of regaining match fitness, that'll happen pretty quickly. So often with these players, when they've been out for a few months, it's not just that they're nervous of them aggravating the injury again. It's that they physically need to get up to match sharpness and match fitness, which just can't be replicated in training. But with the amount of time he's been out for, like, I wouldn't be that surprised if he's thrown straight into the starting 11 on Sunday, for example, or Saturday.
And maybe subbed off early.
Yeah,
maybe subbed off early this week. But then you've got the international break. Where he plays. I don't know if he's been called up for Ecuador, but they play on Thursday night and then Tuesday night. So maybe he'll get some sharpness then and be good to go from after the international break.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Fixtures stay pretty good, don't they?
Yeah. In general, they stay pretty good, and is one I'm considering as well because I'm selling Sterling this week, and we'll be buying Matoma, Gross, or Eze. So I'm trying to decide whether I think that Matoma or Gross are at risk of being rotated. But I do think particularly with Matoma, I think he's got the higher X-mins, although not the penalties. That he's just so important to him that they'll just find a way to play him really regularly. But on the other hand, I keep thinking, De Zerbi's just incredibly unpredictable as a manager and can just bench anyone anytime. So yeah, I'm in two minds about that. And I've got the contrasting thing with Eze in comparison to what I just discussed with Estupiñán, where he actually has been out for a really long time. He played 30 minutes last weekend, but he's not just going to go straight in and play 90 minutes this weekend. So I'd be nervous of that he plays 55 minutes or something. So I'm very tempted to just go with Matoma and attack that Sheffield United fixture for that reason. But it's tricky because I prefer Eze more long term. But yeah, this is definitely where this kind of fixture ticker needs to be considered with the midweek games now anyway. We're reaching that point in the season. And I think the situation as well with Brighton is in terms of where they are, I think they're third in their group. Let me have a quick look. Second because they've just kicked off. But there's no guarantee they'll qualify through their group. So again, their matches are really important, similarly to Newcastle, whereas it's a very different situation with West Ham, for example, or Liverpool, who probably after next week, for example, will be able to just rest players in Europe if people own Bowen and people like that. So yeah, it's certainly an interesting one. I'll just switch us. I was going to switch back to the regular fixture ticker, but I don't think we really need to now. I just thought it'd be interesting because we mentioned it there in terms of free hit 18. For those of you who listened last week, we discussed free hit 18 in a lot of detail on the podcast last week, and why it might be good, why it might be less valuable later in the season. So we won't go over that again. But I guess my questions for you, Ben, with regards to that are how team dependent is free hit 18? Is it massively dependently on the players you own, or is it more that it's clearly the most optimal or not the right thing to do?
No, it depends on your team. It's not clearly the best thing to do, I don't think. And it depends on how many of the key players you've got from that week already, like Villa and Newcastle, Tottenham, and whether you can carry them all the way through to game week 18 without hurting your starting 11 too much, whether you can just hide them on the bench when they've got difficult fixtures. I suppose Dan Burn being injured does slightly favour the free hit 18 strategy if you've got Dan Burn, because you're selling a player who would have had a good fixture in game week 18. But for me now, I've just ran a solve on FPL review on the recommended settings where you put the decay value up to 1.01 and you put the info value to 0 and the FT value to 0, and I think it's only 10 points gain for me at the minute, so it's not enough. I'd want it to be 15 points.
Yep. Yeah, sure. And I guess as you mentioned, it's team dependent. You touched on Dan Burn there. Are there any other just assets in particular that are just absolutely key to that decision, do you think? For example, Arsenal and Liverpool play each other, and if you free hitted, presumably you wouldn't own any players from those teams. So is it people who by then are like to have triple Arsenal, triple Liverpool that should be considering it more?
I guess so, but even if you're not free hitting, FPL review is still pushing get Gabriel this week, and his fixtures are so good. It's not a reason to not get their players. You'd still be fine playing with Saka and Salah in that week, but you just wouldn't want too many of them, I guess. You wouldn't want your defenders to have to play in that fixture. So you just sell Gabriel in week 18 if needs be. And yeah, Tsimikas, I'd sell him as well in game week 17, I suppose. I can check what the FPL review souls are doing. If I'm not free hitting, let's have a look. Plan B, Tsimikas comes out in 16 or 17, I think. Yeah, it comes out and he's staying on my bench he's staying in my 11 in game week 18, even with the tough fixture, he's still in my 11. That's what FPL review is doing, so that is a bit surprising, but maybe things will change as we get closer to the fixture.
Yeah. What time, typically, do you think people need to make that decision by? 3 or 4 game weeks before free hit 18, for example? Or is it a case of when it starts to change your transfer plans in terms of if you run a solve with it and without a free hit? Is it as simple as that, or do you think?
Yeah, that's right.
The sooner the better, or
I would just keep running the solves, and if the non-free hit plan is similar to the free hit plan, then you don't need to decide. But when they start getting a lot different, then you'll have to make a decision. Like for me, I don't think I need to decide until game week 14 or 15. But right now, I'm thinking that I won't free hit then. It's kind of, maybe it's a safe play, and you're just banking maybe it might be 14 or 15 EV for you by that point, and you're just hoping that nothing crazy happens at the end of the season with unexpected double game weeks, or the games get rescheduled in a way that makes a good double game week to free hit in, as well as a good one for bench boosting, which could happen. But I don't know. I guess it is kind of like a safe, conservative play to free hit. Maybe it's too conservative because you're not really getting as much EV as you'd want from your free hit chip.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see in the next few weeks. I'm sure in 4 or 5 weeks' time. We'll be doing a game week 18 free hit specific episode, and maybe a couple of us, or maybe even all 4 of us will end up on free hit 18. Who knows? Great. What I wanted to do for the rest of the episode is I put together some tables just for each position, so defenders, midfielders, and forwards. I've put within those tables the players who I think are most FPL relevant, so there'll be some names you don't see in there that may be higher in terms of EV but just didn't make the table in terms of I don't think they're that relevant to FPL at the moment. And on that table I've got their EV over the next 7 game weeks, so up until game week 19, I think that is. Or game week 18, sorry. I've got their, for this defender one first, I've got their team, non-penalty XG conceded this season so far. I've then got their non-penalty XG over the last year, and then also the same, but for just this season. Again, you can compare those and kind of get an idea of what might or might not be sustainable. And also next to the EV on the right, you can see their expected minutes. This data is all from FPL Review, and they very kindly let us share this data, so we've asked to share it, and so massive thanks to them. I say to him, it's one guy who does it, which just makes it even more incredible, for giving us access to be able to share the data as well. So firstly, in terms of defenders, for those listening, TAA is right at the top of this list. I won't read out everyone, but I mean, do you think he's a player that realistically anyone will actually own, Ben, given his price over the next few weeks?
I think there's 1 or 2 people who own him already who didn't go with Haaland on wildcard and just use that money to get Alexander-Arnold. But
I think Luke might actually. Now I think about it.
Yeah, he's pricey, isn't he? He's less good value than he has been in previous years. But so his non-penalty XGI is 0.4 from the last 365 days, but it's dipped a bit in this season specifically is 0.31, so not quite maybe not as good as it has been.
But again, this is all affected by things like short-term fixtures as well, and I guess we know, in general, Liverpool's defence is nowhere near what it was a couple of seasons ago, which is why I think Trent over the last couple of seasons hasn't been nearly as owned as he was previously, because you don't just have the bread and butter of clean sheet points either. I'm not surprised to see him top, but for 7.9 you're paying a big price for that. And I just think I think it potentially is viable, like you said, for certain people who, if you've only got one of Salah and Haaland, it becomes viable. But even if you're in that position, you're probably trying to work out when you buy back Haaland or buy back Salah, and that might make it tricky to own Trent. But he's one to consider if you're in that position. I don't think there's anything like loads more we need to say on him, to be honest, because he's not going to be in a lot of people's thoughts. Trippier's next on the list, 26.3 EV over the next 7 game weeks. That's with his X-Mins at 88. I think with Trippier, I think a few people sold him even last week, actually, before he played Arsenal. And it might be a case of that was the right time to do it. I think he's quite a comfortable hold at the moment. I don't know, do you think the changes in Newcastle defence changed that, Ben? And do you own Trippier?
No, I don't own Trippier. I went with a wildcard team with Haaland, so I couldn't afford Trippier. I think he's like probably don't sell, don't buy at the minute, because he has Chelsea and Man United coming up after the international break, and then maybe you could buy him in game week 17 ahead of the run of 3 great fixtures, or even game week 15 if you think Everton away is a good fixture. But yeah, I wouldn't buy him now.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think he's a don't buy, don't sell, basically. But yeah, great asset if you still have him. And just, I mean, I went on Burning Questions, the Fantasy Football Scout podcast with FPL Harry on Tuesday, and we discussed this a bit. But yeah, Newcastle's defence is very much the real deal now. We know that from this season so far in terms of their numbers, but we've got the entirety of last season as well. That might be changed with the injuries, but yeah, it's not just his attacking outfit. He also plays for one of the best defences in the league. So yeah, he's a great asset.
Yeah, Newcastle are the second best team in the league, aren't they? According to what's the podcast that I listened to? The Double Pivot podcast, the two professional stats people, and they were saying it's like a debate between Newcastle and Liverpool as to who's the second best team in the league. Because we obviously smashed Sheffield United 8-0, but those kind of results aren't like a one-off for Newcastle. We regularly smash teams.
Yeah. So, what do you think Newcastle will finish? I guess that's not accounting for the fact they've got to play Champions League football, for example. Like surely, I don't think Newcastle will finish anywhere near second, personally. But do
you? Maybe, but I think fifth is the most likely. For us. Like looking at the bookies give us saying we're gonna come fifth. I guess the odds might have changed recently since Tottenham's injuries and their like crisis in defence. They could slip back a bit, but I'd back us to finish like 4th or 5th.
Yeah, but even if you
went ahead of Villa, that's the main thing. Yeah,
definitely. But that's very different to the question of who's been the best team in the league so far this season, though. No, interesting. I kind of wanted to move on to Arsenal because Saliba and Gabriel again both near the top of this list. Midweek there was this happens all the time, there were some rumours that Gabriel was going to be benched in the Champions League, and everyone was panicking and arguing over whether that was a good or a bad thing for his minutes. It turned out he played. So does that impact your thinking at all with regards to Gabriel's minutes moving forwards, whether he plays or not in the Champions League? Or do you see it as irrelevant or a positive that he played?
I see it as a positive that he played. Centre backs, and most of the time centre backs don't need rest at all, but maybe they need like 1 or 2 rests every couple of months, and he got his rest against Sheffield United. I didn't see those rules about him being benched, but Arsenal's attack is underwhelmed a bit, but their defence is really solid. Like they're as legit as Newcastle in defence, even better. So they're one of the best in the league, along with Man City, and I'm going to go for Gabriel this week. I think that's the simple, obvious decision for me. With Burn injured and exactly enough money to get Gabriel, I just have to do it. It's miles ahead on my souls of anything else.
Keep an eye on the price changes then. Make sure you don't get caught out if you've got the exact money.
Yeah, I've got an alarm set on my phone, so like at 10:30 or just before I go to bed to check the price changes.
What a life, rock and roll. I just really like Gabriel. I mean, there was so much talk of him like being a risk, and we discussed this in our Spaces chat last week. When Arteta said last week, or the week before last, sorry, that he's just rested because he's played a lot of minutes internationally, I think he's probably just telling the truth. He's got no reason to lie on that at all. Whereas for the first 2 games of the season when he didn't play, there might have been a rationale for him to lie about it because, maybe he was potentially going to Saudi or there was a bad relationship there. But, if it was just that, if it was tactical rather than giving him a rest, he would just say it was tactical. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. And I think Gabriel will play the majority moving forwards. Maybe misses like 1 game in the next like 8 or 9 would be my guess or something like that. But yeah, it's also the fact his price has dropped so much now just makes him so viable. He's got aerial threat. I mean, if you look at this, his non-penalty XGI, which is almost entirely XG with a player like Gabriel, is only 0.03 per 90 this season. Over the last year, it's been 0.1. And I think last season in the Premier League, it was something like 0.4, 0.14 or 0.15. At the point where you're expecting him to get a goal every like 8 or 9 games. So yeah, his attacking threat makes him just better than Saliba as well. I couldn't believe how they priced him cheaper than Ben White at the beginning of the season, to be honest. And I'd be very confident buying Gabriel now. One player I wanted to discuss that we've not discussed for a while is Reece James, because obviously he's just come back. It'll make people shudder just hearing that name, to be honest, if they owned him at the beginning of the season and if they've owned him in general over the years. I mean, are you one of those people, Ben, like me, who's just always tempted by him whenever he's fit? Or are you more nervous because you know how constantly he gets injured?
Well, that's what transfers are for, aren't they? We can transfer him out when he gets injured. But
did you start with him this season? As
not
well?
Like, I think I did. I forget about my teams early in the season, but I think I started with him. But like, you're not going to buy him going into this run of fixtures right now. But you can just see how he does. See if he's being subbed off early in every game, or if he's gradually increasing his minutes, and then look to bring him in. I guess game week 16 would be the point to bring him in, and then he's got a pretty good fixture in game week 18, and it's a good run of fixture all the way from 16 to 21, 24-ish.
Yeah, for sure. I also just, I just think with a player like him, I just wonder if like now's the time to do it. And I know, because it's essentially when his fixtures turn good, like you just said, then game week 15, 16, again, there's still a lot of fixture congestion in general, and I just wonder if that point, having players like Tsimikas and Gabriel, whether I'll want to go for him. But yeah, it's a decision we can delay anyway, because I don't think anyone's looking to buy him this week, of course, as well. And another player that's probably worth discussing right now, because I've just seen a bit of news actually that's just come through on my phone, is Stupinan. So Milner's actually just gone off after 8 minutes in their game this evening, so I'm presuming that's an injury. Now Milner, does he fill in at left back sometimes as well, or does he just fill in at right back? I'm not sure actually. But either way, we'll discuss the Stupinan anyway. Yeah, he has played left back. In fact, that's where he was playing tonight. Yeah, Veltman right back, Milner left back. So that's a player who plays in a Stupinan's position gone off. It almost feels like there's just the stars are aligning to buy him.
Yeah, and they must think that Stupinan isn't quite ready, because Gilmore's come on from Milner. And obviously Gilmore is a midfielder, so Gross will shift back to left back tonight with Gross at fullback.
So I guess you can look at that 2 ways, can't you? Like, Stupinan's not ready to play 82 minutes or whatever he was needed for. But at the same time, he's on the bench, so they're obviously expecting to play some minutes. Yeah, there are multiple ways you can read it. We discussed it briefly already with going through the fixtures for Brighton, but have you considered a Stupinan at all, or is it, if let's say you had 5 million to spend rather than the money for Gabriel, would you be considering him this week? Because it's not just that he's back; it's also that he's back probably to play Sheffield United. Or you just, again, how confident are you that he starts this weekend?
I guess you want to wait and see what the next press conference is and what De Zerbi says, but
yeah,
he did seem like he said that he was saving him for Sheffield United. So I guess I'd be tempted. Yeah, it's a good fixture, the best fixture.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they're just 100% the main team to target. I've seen a lot of people actually going for Dunk, or considering Dunk as well. And again, similar to Gabriel, we know he has goal threat. That's been even higher this season as well. He takes free kicks as well, which is, I think he's scored 1 free kick in his career, and now takes all free kicks for Brighton. So you've got that additional goal threat as well as from corners. So yeah, I think Dunk's a good buy, like potentially, but at 5, I just don't know if I'd go for him, to be honest. I'd probably at that point just find the extra 0.2 to go for Saliba.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think Brighton's defense is a bit like worse than it was last year. I think I got the idea that was the case. They've sold Caicedo and McAllister, and I think the games are more open, and so you're less likely to get clean sheets out of them, even in the good looking fixtures.
Yeah, potentially. But then if you actually look, I'm just getting up FB ref now. So league table sorted by let's have a look. If we sort it by XG or non-penalty XG conceded, Brighton they're mid-table basically. Yeah, and their non-penalty XG conceded per 90 is 1.29, whereas last season that was 1.31. So it's actually, I think there's probably a bit of maybe a bit of a narrative there that's kind of like emerged about Brighton, because there's been a couple of games where they've conceded loads of goals. So I wonder if actually that's a bit of a narrative, and actually defensively they're probably pretty similar to last season. So that's something to look out for, I guess, when you're making decisions. They're pretty much similar to last season so far in terms of defence. But you're right, they obviously did lose key players, but it's something we've said in the past a lot about De Zerbi, which again makes us nervous about him rotating players. He's one of these managers that's very much a system manager. He's very happy just throwing players into his system and plays the same way every time. So I don't think the defence is much worse, but I just wouldn't consider Dunk because of that. You can just get Saliba for 0.2 more and just get a far better defence, or even I think I'd probably even just prefer Gabriel, to be honest, as well. I guess another player on this list I kind of wanted to discuss briefly. We've already touched on Cash, so we won't touch on him again. Was Tsimikas, because I saw you tweet, Ben, asking what do people think the reason is for Gomez being rotated in for him. Kind of what conclusion did you land at after kind of reading those replies and thinking about that a bit more in terms of why Gomez came in and whether we'd like to see that again?
Yeah, my initial thought was because of the physicality of Luton, and that's their main strength, is set pieces and stuff. And Gomez is just going to be much better at defending those than Tsimikas. I guess that's the reason, and maybe Klopp thought it was an easier fixture and he'd rest Tsimikas. Tsimikas is starting tonight in a heavily rotated team, but it'd be a worry if Tsimikas was benched 2 games in a row, like you wouldn't want him to be. So I'm a bit concerned about Tsimikas. The Brentford game, they're also good at set pieces, but I think he's more likely to start than not. I'd give him a 70% chance of starting against Brentford.
Yep. Yeah. And I guess, I don't know, it's hard to read because he obviously came on against Luton, didn't they? But then the scenario was that they needed a goal, whereas they might not be in that situation, whereas you'd expect them to normally be ahead, and therefore maybe he doesn't come off the bench. And also Gomez had played 90 minutes midweek as well, so maybe that was partly the thinking. But it's a tricky one. It could be partly just the general physicality, could be defending set pieces. Obviously playing Brentford actually, obviously very good from set pieces, but also pretty direct. They play really good football, but that doesn't good football doesn't always mean playing short passing and what kind of initially comes to mind. They're very direct towards their forward players. So maybe that's the reason we see Gomez play again instead. I really wouldn't be that surprised. And in terms of, for me, that's why I'm potentially making a transfer that allows me to use my second transfer to upgrade Kabore rather than to take out someone like Cash for Gabriel. I think that definitely should come into thinking. But we'll see a lot. If Gomez starts this weekend, we'll see a lot of people start to sell Tsimikas, because although you can say he's so cheap, it's fine. You still don't really want to own him if he's not going to be playing regularly anyway. And if he's risking, you start him and then he ends up coming off the bench. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks anyway. Yeah. Anything to add before we move on to midfielders? Anything to add on defenders, Ben?
Well, you can see there's the West Ham defence it's just worrying. They're one of the teams who have been much worse defending this year than last year. So I'm concerned about that, especially as an Areola owner. But actually, as a Morgan Gibbs-White owner, that's another reason I just have to keep the faith with Gibbs-White, because he's playing West Ham this weekend.
And that's a nice little segue, because we're moving to midfielders now. I guess because you mentioned him, I guess Morgan Gibbs-White is in the same category as Gordon. They're exactly the same price. And Palmer, who's a little bit cheaper. I just wasn't sold on Gibbs White at all. When I initially put this list together, I was like, oh, do I put him in? And then I looked at the EV and looked at his fixtures and thought, actually, yeah, why not? Like the fact he's on penalties as well, it just adds so much to a player. And I prefer him to Gordon, to be honest. Like you said, Gordon will play up top this weekend. So if people need a cheap midfielder, maybe they go for him. But again, do we know that that's going to add that much value to him playing as a striker if he does play there anyway? And yeah, in general, like Gibbs White, he seems to have very nailed minutes as well. It's not just the fact he's on penalties. When did you get him? Was that on wildcard? Then in 8, you've had him since.
Got him on wildcard, yeah, because FPL Review loved him, and then there was a few doubts about his minutes because he got a rest in game week 7. But I think Steve Cooper's comments made it seem like it's just a one-off rest, and he's getting 90 minutes every week. I suppose he got 82 minutes a couple of weeks ago, but he's just not putting up the stats. But watching the games, he is like on the back post, hanging there, waiting for the ball to come across for like a tap. I don't know if that sounds like a bad way to look at it, or I'm biased, but like he could get a goal, even though he's got no XG and no XA at all in the last couple of games. You think you wouldn't be surprised if he did manage to get an attacking return.
This
weekend.
Well, that's the kind of thing that data won't just pick up on. If a player doesn't even get their toe to the ball but has a chance, is not going to be recorded as any XG. And in fact, looking at his fixtures, they're good all the way up until, I guess, Brighton's not great in 13, but 12, 14, 15, 16, 18 good. Apart, they've got Spurs and then Newcastle, but they don't have any of the huge teams in that time period. So I think it's an easy hold. And I think it's a similar situation to, there are a lot of people who don't have Mbeumo and they're trying to decide, do I just buy Mbeumo now? Mbeumo, sorry. Do I just buy him now? Or do I get, for example, Matoma for 2 weeks, attack the fixtures and then make the switch? I feel like it's similar with people know they're going to want Palmer, for example, from game week 15. And I think if people are wanting a cheap midfielder, they've got to make a decision of, do they just commit to Palmer now, hope he gets a couple of penalties and bad fixtures, or do they just go for someone like Gibbs White and chase the upside of those more short-term fixtures? I think that's probably the decision to be made for those people.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd recommend actually buying Gibbs White now, because he's just painful to own, but I can't really justify selling him. Palmer's the one that you want as a non-owner, but the fixtures are very tough.
Yeah. I don't think I'd buy him now. I think you can buy him one of those from 14. I think you can buy him, but
one of those Brentford or Brighton midfielders or Eze as well. That's probably the best options for cheap midfielders right now.
Yeah, and it depends what. It depends kind of what other transfers you need to do urgently. If there's plenty you need to do, and you've got, for example, Udoka injured, maybe Porro as well, Maddison, and you had that triplet, for example, you probably just go straight to Palmer if that's the route you're going down. But to be honest, for Maddison owners, they've got the money to spend anyway, so we'll move on to those midfielders. I guess if you were selling Maddison, like, would you just go straight in for like Martinelli, for example, or Saka? Or if you didn't own Mbeumo, would you go for just Mbeumo straight away, for example?
So, I suppose if you'd have a good use of the money and transfer soon, if you go for Mbeumo over them, then Mbeumo is like better value for money. But if you've got nothing to do with the extra money, then you may as well get Martinelli or Saka if you can afford him. Saka's got a bit of a knock, hasn't he? And I don't know about his minutes for this week, but then it's the international break and you'd expect him to be fine after that. But Martinelli's a good option for this week.
Yeah, interestingly, actually. Two things. So in the last hour or so, if you look at review and the data in terms of odds, Martinelli's had a massive boost. It might be to do with, we speculated maybe that was something to do with Nketiah not playing this weekend, and that someone like Trossard, for example, playing centre forward being better for the midfielders in terms of creativity. I guess it could be that. But that is interesting, particularly in terms of his price in comparison to Saka. And if Saka's out and Ødegaard's still out, for example, I guess that increases the chance of Martinelli taking a penalty as well. That suddenly could happen. So maybe that's playing played into it as well. And another thing I was going to mention is that Southgate had like his press conference today after announcing the England squad. I think he mentioned Saka and Maddison, in fact, or are they just in the squad? I can't remember now. I'm pretty sure they're both called up. So that kind of suggests that neither of those injuries are long term anyway, based on what they know at the moment, particularly in terms of Saka, because it happened more recently. Just having a quick look now at the squad, because I just had a chance to glance at it earlier. There it is. Both in the squad, which is interesting. I still think Maddison's a sell for those people who have him, because it's kind of this. He's going to almost definitely miss this weekend, and then he's got tough fixtures anyway. So it just seems like a natural time to just switch to an Arsenal midfielder anyway.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Do you have any love for these mid-priced ones, I guess? So in that category, I guess we put Eze, Matoma, Gross, and maybe go even all the way up to Bowen. Are there any there that you kind of particularly prefer or would be cautious about, Ben?
Well, Gross's minutes do seem pretty good. Like he's playing 90 minutes or 80 plus in every game, but he could be filling in at left back occasionally. Eze's been good this year. I mean, he's like had a leap in his XG and everything in Zaha's absence. Like he's a pretty good option, I think.
He wasn't great in terms of points. I think from people who owned him from the beginning, I think he got one return. But he was a frustrating player to own. Like his underlying data was fine, similar to what you'd expect, similar to last season even. But it's the
underlying
fact
data 0.55 non-penalty XG plus
even higher than last season. Yeah,
it's quite a big jump, because he was 0.37 last year. So he's doing well.
Last 365 days, so all competition, he was 0.43. So it's just one of those things you've got to, if you owned Eze previously and you're considering him now, you've got to try and just ignore the fact that he was frustrating to own in the past and look at the data. And it's just penalties as well adds a lot, doesn't it? And he had those quite a lot last season anyway, with Zaha being, was it last season? Zaha was injured, or was he only left the Premier League, didn't he, in the summer? And that just adds so much to him in terms of value. And he's come back in the perfect time for good fixtures. So it's between Eze, Matoma and Gross for me. The interesting thing with Matoma and Gross is, like, on review, their EV is really close. But I don't know how that looks in terms of like penalty split, for example. So we know that Gross is the main penalty taker. But then since João Pedro's joined, he's taken 2 penalties. And for one of those, Gross was on the pitch. So it seems like João Pedro is the main penalty taker. So actually how you read his minutes actually probably makes a difference for how you read Gross's. If you're convinced that João Pedro is not going to play this weekend, suddenly that means that Gross is almost definitely on penalties based on your opinion. And that probably puts him ahead of Matoma. And you might have a different opinion in terms of him potentially filling him at wing back as well. So I think it's a lot closer between those two than people maybe might think, because they don't hear Gross mentioned much. And a lot of that is last season McAllister was on penalties. So when there was a time when everyone owned 2 of, or maybe even 3 of, March, Matoma and McAllister, and Gross didn't have a look in, but that's because he wasn't on penalties. If Gross was on penalties last year and McAllister wasn't, it would have been Matoma, March or Gross we were considering during that time. So I definitely think he's one for consideration, and in his one for consideration for me as well, with my potential move. Shall we move on to forwards, Ben?
Yeah.
I don't think there's much to discuss here, to be honest. I mean, midfielders and defenders are interesting because people are transferring out Spurs defenders and Maddison, but with forwards, I don't think anyone's making a move here, but I thought we might as well touch on it anyway. In terms of this data, if you're not watching, unsurprisingly, Haaland's right at the top in terms of EV, and in terms of his underlying data, it's in fact it's similar, if not a bit higher than last season in terms of his expected assists, particularly. Watkins is second on this list. Wilson's third, who's such an interesting one because his underlying data is so ridiculous, but he's just never going to play regularly, is he? And Isaac's back after the international break. Is that right, Ben?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I haven't really been keeping up to date on that. But
and it doesn't even pair with fixtures as well. It's just not. Doesn't feel like the time.
You wouldn't transfer him in now.
It's a shame
because have to wait and see.
Can us really want there to be a run where suddenly one of them is injured and they've got a really good run of fixtures, for example, and they would be no-brainers. Yeah, what stood out to me in here actually was Solanke. Like, I couldn't believe, like, his non-penalty XG per 90 this season is 0.39. That's really high, considering he's on penalties as well. And even, like, it over the last year, it's 0.47 XG plus XA per 90. So it just, a player like Solanke at his price is on penalties. I think there'll be a time when we consider him, and maybe that'll be later in the season or even before Christmas, but later on when their fixtures get good around Christmas. But yeah, he's not one to consider now, but I just had good memories of owning him last season, so it's nice to see him on this list, even above Alvarez, in fact, in terms of EV over the next 7 game weeks. But again, a lot of that is just minutes as well.
Yeah, maybe Solanke will be an option if there's like a big injury in game week 12 or over the international break, and maybe you have to sell Watkins or Haaland or sell one of the expensive midfielders and upgrade Archer, because Solanke's got Sheffield United away in 13, and that begins a pretty decent run of fixtures, I suppose.
Yeah,
nothing too bad. Villa at home isn't such a bad fixture, I don't think.
He's also exactly the same price as Awoniyi. I think it's how you pronounce it.
It's a difficult one.
Yeah. Exactly the same price, like really similar underlying data, really similar minutes. But Solanke's got penalties, so if it comes down to those two, you're going to go for Solanke. I guess for Alvarez owners, like, do you think he's just in exactly the same position as someone like Trippier now? Like, just don't buy, don't sell him. Like, because their fixtures aren't great, or do you think, like, for Alvarez, do you think actually owners like could be considering moving him on now? But it just seems such an odd one for a player that's so rarely nailed in a Man City team.
Yeah, who's the alternative? Because I mean, Villa's fixtures are starting to get a bit tricky. I mean, the next 3 are pretty easy, but then they get tough again. And if you can just hold Alvarez, I mean, Spurs at home in game week 14 isn't looking as difficult now. It looks like a pretty easy fixture if Romero and Van de Ven are still out, and then it gets easy again. So, Man City can still hammer the teams like Chelsea away. They could rack up a good score as well. So I'd keep him, I think.
Yeah. And I guess the last player I wanted to touch on here was Darwin. I just think the time's gone to get him now. Jota's back. Gakpo's now playing again. Salah's fit. Diaz. In fact, there was good news today actually that his dad's been released, so that's really good news. And with that, that means that means likely he'll play more minutes as well. So I just think with Darwin, I absolutely love typing in when I did this table. His non-penalty XGI over the last year was just exactly 1. I enjoyed typing that in. But it's just, it's just mad that his underlying data is like not even just over the short term, like over the last 2 seasons, is basically the same as Haaland's, but he just doesn't play minutes, and also does complete opposite in terms of finishing big chances.
Yeah, but we just sell him when we just sell him if you own him, because like a few people do own him. Maybe you'd keep him for this last week, and then international break and Man City away. Game week 13, that's when you might get a rest, or it's a tough fixture either way. But then they have really good fixtures after that. So
I think you probably keep him this week, but I guess if you keep him this week, you've got an easy switch, because I guess most people who own Darwin, the chances are they don't own Watkins. So there's a switch there. But I guess there'll be some, maybe a lot of the people who own Darwin are the people who don't own Haaland, and it's him they have instead. So there's probably good reason to keep him, or it could be that those people switch to, I know, even Alvarez now, maybe, who knows, maybe, I talked about whether it is viable to, it wasn't viable to buy or sell him, but maybe that's one of the few players you own where you actually do switch to Alvarez next week or something. I don't know. It's an interesting one. I was caught in that loop last season of owning Darwin for ages and just never the right time to sell him, so I had him for so long and he just didn't do anything. Yeah.
It could be the same story with me and Morgan Gibbs-White for the next few weeks, but at least Gibbs-White isn't as expensive.
Transfer him out in game week 38.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we'll just move on to questions, because honestly, in terms of forwards, there's not a lot to discuss, really. I've written 3 down here, so we'll do those ones first, and then I'll just check the Twitter to see if any more have come in. So firstly, from FPL Commander, any concern about Mitoma struggling against a low block Sheffield United, Ben? How much would you kind of read into that kind of thing?
I don't know. I think it's been a good fixture for teams so far. They're poor defensively. They're not even good at like executing the low block, are they? So, you wouldn't be worried, I don't think.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. I just think we put too much emphasis on that idea of teams playing with a low block. Like, generally they play with a low block because they're playing a really good team and they're a really bad team. That's generally why it happens. And yeah, in terms of struggling to break down a low block, that can happen. And obviously teams can put in really good defensive performances, but Mitoma against Sheffield United is the best possible fixture, to be honest. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. Mark J85 asked if we got any thoughts on Kudus. I think he asked that because I mentioned him on the podcast I was on Tuesday, and I kind of mentioned the fact I hadn't really thought about him. Having had more time to think about him now, I just wouldn't go for him. There's just not enough long-term data for me to trust. To put trust in owning him, even though he's looked really good for the last two. And I just, again, with him being a fairly new signing, he's only started the 2 games in a row. Before that, he wasn't even starting regularly. So I would just be nervous about his minutes, and would just go for an alternative player. Yeah, any particular thoughts on him?
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with that. He's a good player to watch, but maybe he's not going to be consistent with the returns.
Yeah. The third question we have, a bit more trivial, and in fact I'll read out Seb's answer first because he actually answered it on Twitter, even though he's not on the podcast this week. The question is from the FPL store: which current Premier League manager are you guys most similar to as FPL managers, either tactically or emotionally? Seb said Graham Potter. He said not current, I know, but I'd also be instantly uncurrent myself. The only reason is that we both love to rack up XG delta above all else and nothing more. I think that's a good comparison. For me, probably just Guardiola because I'm world class. That was a joke, by the way. I was thinking about this. I think probably I'm pretty... I guess I'm quite set in my ways in terms of the right way to play FPL, and I just put little to no value on the eye test, for example, and just look at underlying data, use a model, adjust expected minutes, and just trust the process. And Big Ange very much has a process and a way of playing. Even when they're down to 9 men, he does exactly the same thing, and is patient with his system. And usually that patience is also my downfall as well, in being too patient with players. And a lot of people argue that's what Ange did on Monday, is that just playing that ludicrous high line gave them absolutely no hope. Although it was very entertaining to watch. I've never seen anything like it. Any thoughts for you, Ben?
Just trying to think who's the most emotionally dead manager who doesn't get too high or too low. Maybe Eddie Howe is just steady and doesn't react too much. Yeah.
Emotionally dead's not a very nice way of putting it.
No, but I mean, compared to the rest of the FPL managers in the community, I don't get as upset about things going against me as most people. I suppose.
Sure.
Amongst the analytics community, that's kind of normal, isn't it?
Probably more normal. Yeah, probably more normal. I don't know who Luke would say. We can just say Pep for Luke, to be honest, because he picks his team for him. It seems like some weeks. Great. We did have another few questions that just came through on Twitter as well, just this evening. One was about free hit 18. We've already covered that, so we won't answer that one. Righty FPL asks, how bad do you think rotation will be over game week 14 to 16, and how can we best manage it? The deadlines fall within 7 days, the 2nd, 5th and 9th of December, and there's Europe the midweek after. Are players not called Bruno Fernandes all doomed for a benching and or early subs? Can we even trust Salah during that period? Thoughts on that, Ben?
It depends on whether they've got important European games in the midweeks either side of before 14 and after 16, and how deep the squad is. So Newcastle, they haven't got a deep squad, they can't afford to rest. Liverpool will be through in Europe, I think, after tonight, and then so Salah should be able to rest in the European nights. And having one midweek game is fine. I think if you're not playing every midweek, just having one midweek game in the Premier League is okay. But yeah, you'd expect Man City to play like heavily rotated teams in the Champions League because they're basically through now. They just need a draw against Leipzig. And it depends on how like difficult the Premier League games are as well. I'm just looking at them. What do you think?
Yeah, I think because of what you mentioned with regards to City probably already being qualified by then, I wouldn't be too worried about them. I think we could see a similar situation probably with Liverpool and West Ham. So that's in terms of Champions League fixtures. With regards to the midweek Premier League games, yeah, I think we will see rotation. I think, to be honest, I think more and more if you go back over the years, like we see that more and more every season, to be honest, more teams are having squads with bigger depth, with more depth and putting more value on that for that reason, and are more likely to rotate. So yeah, there probably will be some, but I also think in some ways it might be easier because we've got Archer who's 4.5 and plays every week. So he's an option that could, the majority of us have on our benches anyway. Players like Kabore seems to be playing pretty regularly now for Luton. So I actually think there's a lot of people who already have good bench depth as well at the moment. And if you don't, maybe that's just something to consider with your transfers at the moment. Newcastle, this is from Bano B. Mitty FPL. Newcastle or Brentford, which side is better for the Christmas schedule? Well, thinking ahead. Newcastle, Brentford, Christmas schedule.
Is like 18. I think it's Newcastle. It's Newcastle, isn't it? Let's have a look. Newcastle's got like Fulham, Luton against, and then Forest, and then it gets tougher. Brentford have the blank then, so it's got to be Newcastle.
Yeah, maybe they mean for that period afterwards. So yeah, definitely Newcastle initially, but then definitely Brentford afterwards because they might have a double game week as well. So yeah, that's something to bear in mind that there might be a double for Brentford and Man City in either 20 or 21.
You transfer Newcastle defender to Brentford defender or something, I suppose.
Yeah, potentially. One other question says, are you glad Sterling has got a rest over the international break? I think that's aimed at me because that Pete Carter probably knows that I own him. I'm not glad because I want to see him play for England, actually. I think he's a great footballer and I'm selling him, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway. So yeah, finally selling Raheem Sterling after all this time. I bought him, sadly not for his first haul, but I've had him for his second. All those two hauls he had back to back in, I think, game week 8 and 9 or 7 and 8 or something. And was pleased he finally got that assist playing against 9 men. I was watching that game against Spurs, and like every time he was through on goal and they just weren't timing the pass. So I was glad he at least got something, but it's also kind of frustrating that he kind of got subbed off at 85 minutes because there was like another 15 minutes, and you never know, he might have been the player that went on to get the big haul. But yeah, finally selling him. Great. I guess just to finish, Ben, are you captaining Salah this week?
Oh, I assume so. Yeah, like he's far enough ahead on FPL review. He's 6.8. I've forgotten. Liverpool are playing Brentford, aren't they?
Yeah, Liverpool, Brentford. Yeah.
But Man City have a tough fixture.
Chelsea.
Man City have Chelsea away. So
yeah.
What about Saka then? Is Saka not an option? He's got a knock, hasn't he? So if he was guaranteed 90 minutes, then you might consider Saka. But
yeah,
I suppose it has to be Salah.
Salah. I don't own Salah. I've still, I haven't bought him because I've not wildcarded basically, and I've not really had the opportunity to. My plan is to buy him in game week 14. So this is kind of my last scary week without Salah. But it doesn't actually feel. That's probably famous last words. It doesn't feel too scary just because it's Brentford this week. Like Luton last week, even though he was less captain than Haaland, that felt scary because that Luton's the kind of game where you just know you could get a massive outlier and there's like a 7-0 or something. Whereas Brentford, I'd be surprised if they scored 3 or 4. So I'm not as worried about it this week. And I was going to be captain Saka, but I think I'll probably captain Bruno Fernandes now. I think that's my plan. Which seems absolutely wild, and it's quite fun because his ownership's so low that if he, it's basically like 200% on everyone when he's playing, Any points he gets is a massive gain on anyone, but also very worrying. And there's this annoying thing that keeps happening where Liverpool keep playing like last on a Sunday, so I have to kind of wait for Salah to play. I can't get it over and done with early. I'd much rather Fernandes played second, and I still had hope even if Salah hold. But yeah, there's actually Fernandes on review. Fernandes, Rashford, Martinelli, and Son are all above Haaland this week. Interestingly, and probably Watkins, depending where you put Haaland's minutes, depending how you've adjusted those. But yeah, straightforward one, I think, if you own Salah.
But it's not such an easy fixture because Brentford are pretty good at playing these top sides away from home or at home. They're like, that's their speciality. If there's one team who look good on paper but are actually really tough, it's Brentford.
Yeah. True. Cool. Great. I think we'll finish there. So yeah, thanks for joining me, Ben. Appreciate it. And have a good rest of your evening and good luck with your decision making. And
thanks. Good luck to you too.
Oh, cheers, mate. Yeah, and to everyone who tuned in or who's listening to this back, sorry, we're not live this week. Have a great game week. All the best. Bye bye.
And enjoy the international break. Got a long,
of course,
long break, and try to switch off from FPL if you can.
Yeah. Do try and do that as well. I actually quite like the international break, to be honest, more than most people. But yeah, enjoy everyone. Bye bye.